Y'all may or may not know this, but on July 29th of 2022, I got injured. Now, I'm not just talking about any small injury. I mean, I'm sure we've all gone through that occasional sprain to the wrist or occasional fracture to the hand. No, I'm talking about dislocating my knee on the soccer field while concurrently tearing my medial patellofemoral ligament, the ligament that literally holds my knee in place. It was a pretty bad day to say the least. But now I know what you guys are thinking. Oh my god, it must have hurt so bad. Or, oh no, the pain on the field must have been unbearable. And yeah, it hurt like hell. However, what I think took more grit, more resilience out of me was my physical journey back upwards. I mean, after not being on my feet and being on crutches for months on the end, my quads had literally shrunk to half the size they are right now. And to rectify the situation and get back to normal, I had to go through hundreds of hours of intense physical therapy. Hours of squatting, hours of deadlifts, hours of calf raises, hours of battle ropes, and hours training to run. Now, during this time period, I had to put exactly two things on the table. One, being my, blood, sweat, and tears, but two, and more importantly, being nutrients, specifically an increase in protein intake. Now, the average American usually intakes about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of their body weight. Back then, I was taking about 2 grams of protein per kilogram of my body weight. It was a pretty drastic change. But I think during this period, there was one thing that I did different than what the majority of America would have done had they been in my situation. I recovered, successfully, but on a vegetarian diet. Now look, I know I'm not a healthcare professional or doctor. I'm not someone who has multiple PhDs or someone who's conducted numerous research studies on the topic of vegetarianism. I mean, in reality, I'm just a high schooler in junior year who spends his time experimenting with food fusion recipes, fiddling with the guitar, and don't shame me for this, but singing in the shower. However, I'm also a high schooler in junior year who's experienced the feasibility of the vegetarian diet firsthand. I'm a high schooler in junior year who, during the months I was bedridden from my injury, spent months on the end reading the various books and articles regarding the intricacies and benefits of the vegetarian diet. And so before I come up here and give this speech on this topic I hold so dear to my heart, I'd just like to say that my intent here isn't to impose my opinions or judgment on anyone else's ideologies, but rather to speak purely from an educational perspective, from personal experience, to raise awareness and encourage you all to think again and think beyond the societal negative constraints surrounding vegetarianism. But now look, I know that when I come up here and give a speech about this topic, y'all are probably going to be thinking that I'm going to ramble on about how we need to benefit our fight against climate change or save those animals from being ruthlessly slaughtered. And yeah, while I wholeheartedly agree with these claims, I'd actually like to stray apart from them and go more over the practical pros of the vegetarian diet for the average American Joe. Specifically, throughout the entirety of my speech, I'd like to address the many myths and misconceptions regarding the health implications of the vegetarian diet compared to, say, our carnivorous or omnivorous one. But to fully understand this issue, let's travel back in time all the way to the 1800s. Essentially, during this time period, there was a very prominent scientist named Justus von Liebig. Now, Liebig was pretty well educated, but at times he made some controversial calls, to say the least. For instance, one day, he hypothesized that all muscular energy comes from animal protein and animal protein alone. Now, his tenets became so widespread and well-known across America without any further reasoning or factual examination that the very idea of living a healthy life or the very idea of being strong became to be based off his theory about a vegetarian versus carnivorous or omnivorous diet. Sure, later on, scientists and researchers actually proved his theory wrong with scientific evidence and tangible scientific studies, but by that time, America had already caught on to his ideology. America had taken the bait, and America had become hooked on to meat. Ultimately, all of these reasons why we live in a world today where, according to the National Institute of Health in 2023, 81% of Americans eat meat at least once per week. Have y'all seen the stereotyped American diet? I mean, yeah, it's making my mouth water, but come on, it's just screaming at me: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, sugars and fats. I can go on and on. Ultimately, the fact here is that America needs change, and vegetarianism delivers it. And so that brings us back to today. So let's start deconstructing these myths and misconceptions and start thinking again about this wonderful but widely misunderstood vegetarian diet. Now, primarily, there's a belief that a vegetarian diet does not have enough protein. Now, I can't tell y'all how many times one of my friends has come up to me and said, hey man, where in the world are you getting any sort of protein from? I mean, isn't getting protein pretty much impossible on a vegetarian diet? Well, I'm just going to strike that down right here and right now because that's just inherently false. That's why, according to the National Institute of Health, all plant foods contain all 20 amino acids, including the 9 indispensable ones, with these amino acids being the literal building blocks of protein molecules. Essentially, the idea is that if you consume the sufficient amount of amino acids, you will have enough protein regardless of the source. Sure, amino acid distribution may be less optimal in certain plant foods. I mean, for instance, we have the amino acid lysine, which is present in much lower levels in some foods such as grains like rice. But ultimately, that's only a problem if you were to eat rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day. Ultimately, the idea is that if you eat a diverse portfolio of vegetables, of legumes, of fruits, of grains, and of nuts and seeds, you will have sufficient amino acids, and thus you will have sufficient protein. Don't just take it from me, take it from Ellie Greenwood, Michael Wardian, and Sage Kennedy. Now, I know they may just seem like 3 random names popping up on the top of your screen, but in reality, they have two important things in common. One, being that they're all ultra-distance elite marathon runners, meaning that they're the ones who race consistently at the world-class levels, and they're the ones you see on the side of the highway running 100 miles at once. But two, and more importantly, they're all long-term vegetarians. I mean, at the age of 48 years old, Michael Wardian took a Forrest Gump-style journey across the entirety of America. Guess what? On a vegetarian diet. I mean, even speaking from personal experience, I was able to recover post-surgery, post-operation, when I needed excessive amounts of proteins, you probably guessed it, on a vegetarian diet. But now look, I know what y'all are thinking. Well, doesn't meat also provide this protein? I mean, doesn't meat also provide this energy? Yeah, but at this point in time, everyone has to think about what package of protein, what package of energy you want. Do you want an animal-based protein package, which, according to the National Institute of Health, contains numerous inflammatory molecules, endotoxins, more saturated fat, and thus impairs blood flow? Do you want a source of protein that contains literally no fiber in a world where, according to the New York Times in May 2023, 95% of Americans consume less than half the recommended amount of dietary fiber per day? Hopefully not. And so now let's compare this back to a vegetarian diet, a plant-based package, which according to Harvard Health in July 2024, contains 64 times more antioxidants than an animal-based diet, contains less inflammatory molecules, less endotoxins, more vitamins, more minerals, more fiber, and absolutely no cholesterol. I mean, a group of firefighters from Texas out of all states, the state famous for barbecue and meat, even did a study on this. They were essentially made to eat a vegetarian diet for 28 days straight. The result? Much lower levels of blood cholesterol and thus better blood circulation. Ultimately, that's why that same Harvard Health study furthers that switching over to a vegetarian diet reduces the chances of being obese and reduces the likelihood of contracting severe chronic medical disorders such as coronary artery disease, hypertension, and even cancer. Ultimately, the idea is that if you switch over to a vegetarian diet, you will be better off. But now look, I know that I've just come up here and stated 1,000 different reasons and 1,000 different benefits of the vegetarian diet, but y'all are probably wondering, if there's so many benefits, why haven't people just, switched? Well, I believe it's for 2 different reasons. One, being that people have defaulted to the carnivorous diet, but 2, and more importantly, it's because of these misconceptions and myths, not just regarding health implications, but regarding what exactly the vegetarian diet is. I mean, I can't tell y'all how many times one of my friends has come up to me and said, when we were eating dinner, are you just gonna order like 1 cold raw vegetable for dinner? I mean, is that all you're gonna eat? Because ultimately, this is the reality in most people's minds, the illusion of what the vegetarian diet looks like. However, at the end of the day, not only did my friends start asking to taste my meal because it looked better, but I also had to shell out 20 less bucks. This is the reality of the vegetarian diet. But now look, at the end of the day, I know many of y'all eat meat, and will continue to eat meat after this TED Talk. I know that I'm not Thanos who just in the snap of his fingers can change an entire existence, an entire ideology. I'm not trying to change everyone's eating habits in the matter of 10 minutes. However, at the very least, take this chance to try out the vegetarian diet, just like that group of firefighters, maybe just for a couple of weeks or even for a couple of days, and see how you feel. We as Americans are always looking for ways to challenge the social norm. We use the customary system instead of the metric one. We call football soccer. So ultimately, take this chance today to look past and think again and think beyond the societal negative constraints surrounding vegetarianism. You won't regret it. Thank you.